You know the drill, it's a game jam. It's Geojam 2021, it's hosted by Icoso, and I made a game, so let's get into it. My dad once told me about this game he played back in the 80s called Wizardry, Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord, commonly called Wizardry. Anyway, I went into this jam with the intention of creating my game based on graphics inspired by this piece of media. Why? Well, I felt like I haven't really been wacky enough with my game visuals as of late, so I figured a week-long game jam is the perfect time to experiment. I also recently learned how to use non-derivative classes, enums, and switch statements in Unity. About time, right? So I was ready to make a full-blown RPG for this thing. That's a joke. I'm not nearly that motivated, and I recently cleaned my glasses so I could see the vines of nettle stretching for miles down that road. I started off poorly by creating some textures that did not in fact fit my desired aesthetic and sticking them in a fresh Unity project. Taking a page from a short hike, I decided to render my game in a forced low resolution kind of style. So thanks to Devlog for introducing me to render textures which fit the bill well enough. I installed the URP to try and give the game a CRT look using post-processing, but settled on the screen having a just barely detectable level of aberration around the edges. Well, on the bright side, I can use the shader graph now, and with that comes my greatest challenge yet. Try planar mapping, which took about 10 minutes. Does it work on all axes or just overall? Yeah, it works that way. Works that way, and it works that way. Sick! I slapped together some basic movement, changed the floor to a nicer color, and got to doing some character design. Hell yeah! Since the Geojam recommends that submitted games follow a geometric kind of theming, I figured there was no better game to steal ideas from than Super Paper Mario. Combine it with retro graphics and boom! A unique art style is born. Creativity is just perfected pragmatism. And plagiarism. Though I did not intend on creating an all-out RPG, I did intend on creating a basic questing system. And now that I knew how to use enums and all that other stuff I mentioned, I could do it in an organized way. I didn't, because that takes time, but it's the possibility that mattered. I started with the UI, which I knocked out of the park in no time, and then created references to all the elements in a script. And with basic toggling in order, I began my maddening descent into programming the systems that manage quests and item-related data. The classes were actually quite simple and only contained a few bits of data, such as the name, description, and the UI element representing them, aptly named representative. The difficulty came into play when I created systems for handling lists of these items and quests. While some might say I'm notorious for improperly using for each statements to enumerate, I think that's how you use that word, to enumerate through lists and arrays, I would argue that lists and arrays are notorious for being stupid and dumb and not being able to handle an index that exceeds the array count. That's all to say, it has 10 items on a list, I accidentally asked for item 11 and it wet the bed. So the majority of my bug fixing time was spent adding checks and balances to ensure that lists could enumerate through their items peacefully. I did this for a method that adds items to your inventory, a method that removes items from your inventory, a method that sorts items in your inventory, a method that tells an NPC which dialogue to play using a list of strings, and a whole bunch of other methods. The rest of my programming time was spent deducing exactly what I wanted the code to accomplish. I went into this with the goal of making a small questing system, but not a game. Thus, I had a hard time deciding how to optimize my code for the best readability and flexibility. For a while, I tossed around the idea of having a main quest with markers and a specific item that you could hold in your hand. Both of these things were iterated away both for the sake of time and for the sake of I don't care about this feature. Programming, just like regular old writing, is not just about the syntax and correct grammatical format, but also about the way you structure and convey deeper and wider reaching concepts. The plot of a game, like the plot of a book, needs to have flow and a unifying theme or themes. The code of your core game loop should read like a scene from a book or movie, without all that extra literary fluff, of course. If you don't know what's happening in your game, then your code will read like an unthought-through assembly of ideas. Hence iteration, hence refactoring, and hence, the most helpful of all, possessing an actual understanding of your game. So with that in mind, I started writing a list of things that would happen throughout mine. Plot points, if you will. Who would you talk to, what would they want you to do, and what would happen as a result. Immediately, the scope of the game became much clearer, and the concerns of implementing things that would need to be replaced in the future was severely reduced. I was able to complete the majority of the codebase in just a few hours after that, and though I did do some small refinements and changes for flexibility and readability, the overall form remained consistent. With a functional, if simplistic, codebase ready, I started working on the environment. I went from a list of locations that would be joined in some vague way, to a small city with a beach, to an even smaller set comprised of 3 distinct areas: the shops, the skyrises, and the desert, which was shrunk down more and more as time ran out. I began with a rough mock-up of the city in Blender, since I find Unity's scene arrangement system to be slightly frustrating at the best of times. I used this rough outline to work out the size of a level, and then added a wireframe modifier to the blend file. Using this, I started building proper prefabs for each of the buildings. The rest of development followed this kind of loop. Think of a quest idea, design NPC, implement NPC, set up NPC questline, possibly adjust the code to accommodate, possibly adjust world textures to accommodate, try out questline, squash bugs for 20 minutes, try out the questline within the whole game, repeat. I hung out with my friend the afternoon before the jam ended, so I ended up staying up till 5 in the morning making sure everything worked and got it uploaded. It was relatively stress-free since I had done most of it the day before, but there was a point where I was quite tired and considered not submitting it. But I did, and you know what? I'm happy with it. The actual gameplay can be a little slow. Some jammers mention that it's a little confusing to figure out what to do, and I personally would have liked to make each building more unique and each mechanic more clear. But I'm happy with it, and if you'd like to play it, there's a link in the description below. That's all, and I'm not really one for drawn out goodbyes, so I'll be ending the video right now.